E.B. Sanders, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you today. I know you have a lot of expertise around the areas of values-based leadership, and we're going to connect into this idea of team member agency and the importance of diversity in values-based leadership today. Before we get started, I did want to share your bio with everybody. E.B. Sanders is a sought-after coach and staffing consultant serving creative individuals, companies, and organizations. She believes that great leaders have extraordinary careers, and her mission is to convince everyone that they don't have to choose between happiness and success. And by the way, I think that is an amazing framing and focus on your work with people. I completely agree with that. And I hope to hear a little bit more about your personal background. Before we launch into the conversation, anything else you would like to share in terms of your background, personal context, anything like that? And really, like, how did you even get into this space, and why is this something you're so passionate about?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started out my professional career as a college professor, and I absolutely adored my job, but education budgets being what they were, I was eventually forced out, unfortunately. And that was not a decision I had made, right? It was one that was put on me. And I then had to do the work to find out what my next career would be. Made my way into the corporate world, into leadership and development and managing creative teams and staffing and recruiting and all of that really fun stuff that I loved. But then I found myself not being able to actually focus on my employees and their actual best needs. I had to toe the company line, which generally is not to tell them, oh, hey, you'll do better if you leave here. So I decided to go out on my own and start my own coaching practice. And it didn't actually click with me for a little bit that what I had been doing, from being a professor to being in staffing and learning and organizational development to doing coaching, it's all the same thing. I'm helping people find their way in the world and figure out how they want to show up and how they can show up as their best selves. And so once that clicked for me, my practice really came into fruition, and I was able to help people become the leaders that they want to be, become the employees they want to be happy doing what they're doing. And so it's been a really interesting and wild ride for me personally.
That's awesome, and thank you for that background. And I'm just curious, because I'm a professor. Where did you teach? What was your area of focus?
I taught at San Francisco State University, and I was a humanities professor, so I got to teach the real fun stuff, the arts and culture and values, and why humans solve problems creatively the way we do. And one of my favorite courses was the history of creativity, and I've taken that one with me into everything that I've done, for sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And there's so much wonderful connection between the academic space and then the practitioner space. And that's something that, I wrestle with that tension, and try, I really have a huge draw into the practitioner space, hence, my consulting work and the podcast and other things like that. But I love connecting with people who have that dual background, and I feel a kinship to that kind of an orientation. So that's wonderful to learn about.
Absolutely. I feel we look at the world a little bit differently than people who have just gone straight through the corporate world. And I feel that we look at the bigger picture in a much different way.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. That's certainly what I try to do. Whether I'm successful, I don't know all the time, but well, wonderful. Thank you for that background. Now, as we launch into the conversation today, I was intrigued by this idea of values-based leadership. I think we know it's important to have core values, and most organizations have a value statement. They have core values on their website. They have it up on the wall, on the company wall. They'll put it on a mouse pad, and have, it at everyone's computers. But we all know from both experience, as an employee, but also, as a leader trying to wrangle your team together and get them all bought into like these values, as well as, the consulting work that we do, like it's not that simple, right? Like having values-based leadership is far more than simply getting our heads wrapped around some core value statement and some values that we put on the website. We have to do much more work than that. So for you, what does that mean to have values-based leadership? And then we can get into really what organizations can and should be doing to try to do that more robustly in a more sustainable way, so it can actually have meaning and add meaning and purpose and benefit the organization the way it's intended to.
Absolutely. I feel like, and I think everyone has experienced this. Yes, every company has that mission statement, that value statement, and they really go at the lip service of this is what we stand for. And if you look at them, a lot of the times they are just these platitudinous words that don't actually mean anything. Yeah, they look great on the company mug and on the mouse pad, but they're empty for all intents and purposes. And do they sound good at a big trade event? Maybe, but for your actual day-to-day employees, they have to feel those values and uphold those values, and they have to share those values for them to mean anything. And the words themselves, even if they have meaning to, let's say, the CEO or COO who wrote them down, how they look at one thing is going to be very different than, one of the people sitting in a cubicle pounding out a spreadsheet every day. They're going to look just at the language completely different. And so it truly has to not just be the words, it has to be the embodiment of behaviors. And it has to start from the top. It just can't be put on everyone to live this idea and say these things and feel like, oh, we've all stepped in line because we've got a list of words we're meant to follow. If the actual leadership, the people who have true agency, the stakeholders, aren't following and living by those values, how they mean them to mean, they're expecting their employee base to guess, which is never good. So
Yeah, and saying one thing and doing something different is like the surefire way to not only cause confusion, but to really undermine people and to demotivate them and to erode trust. And so it's one thing to have these values. It's a completely different thing to live them. And to have aspirational or espoused values, that's great, but you do have to reach for those aspirational values, and people can see it a mile away when it's fake and when you're not actually doing it. And they can see the lower level employees, line level employees, middle management, they know when the C-suite, when senior management executives kind of have their own set of rules and expectations versus what everyone else is expected to do in terms of accountability and all of that. And so it's one of my pet peeves. I know as an employee in an organization, if I hear someone say all these aspirational values, I'm like, great, I'm on board. That's wonderful. And then in the following days, weeks, and months, I see completely different behaviors. It just makes me cynical. Then I don't believe them. I don't trust that they're actually they feel it's important what they're saying. So that's not what we want at all. We want to find ways to embed those values into the behaviors of the organization, and the policies, practices, and procedures of the organization, the mechanisms that drive the behaviors of the organization.
Absolutely. And it can't just be that the leaders have to live the values every day, because that should just be something that is intrinsic to them. Those values should have come from how they're already behaving, how the business was formed, their long-term goals with what they're doing. Those things should be just intrinsically there and built, again, from the top down, but they lose sight of getting those values to be understood by their workforce, especially when they don't start with making hires based on people who share those values, which, they want their businesses to be successful. They want the organization to thrive. And so a lot of hiring practices tend to be, well, can this person tick all the boxes that we need to be, instead of, does this person share our values? Are they the type of person who's going to foster how we want to work? Maybe they don't tick every single box, but you can train for skill. A lot of it starts with who you're bringing into the organization. You can't shove, square pegs into round holes and expect them to be complete, right? You can do it. It's just not going to be comfortable for anybody. And it's not going to be the true vision of the organization. And so it genuinely has to start with hiring. It has to start with, you know, not checking in, like, are we living to our values, but making sure that the feeling is mutual and that people genuinely understand the reasoning. And I think trust, you brought up trust. I think that is so paramount. Trust and transparency about why certain decisions are being made, because that's how we know, like, the rank and file tend to get upset is when they feel that they were just being told to do things without the understanding of why. And do they have to know why every decision is being made? No, some of those are stakeholder decisions, but overall, we're all working towards a common goal for common reasons, to share common values for a joined outcome. And I feel that unfortunately, that trust and that transparency is a giant forgotten piece, along with the hiring at the base level.
Yeah, it has to start, like, once we establish through a collaborative process to generate buy-in, once we establish these shared values, then it has to then be sustainably, consistently implemented across all levels of the organization to have any meaning, starting at the recruitment process, the hiring process, the onboarding process has to be built into performance management systems, leadership development processes, all of that. And it's not enough for, the VPs, the C-suite to have an executive retreat where one weekend they create all of these and then they come back and they say, hey, everyone, here's our values. And then let's move on. And no one really ever, it comes up every now and then, but it's not embedded into anything in the day-to-day. That's what a lot of organizations do. And that serves really no purpose. It doesn't have any impact, right?
Absolutely. And again, a lot of it comes down to language. Like I've had, C-suites come back and say, one of our core values is integrity. Okay, integrity to a 65-year-old white guy who makes several million a year versus a 20-year-old person of color who's just graduated school. Those are two very different concepts, and the language is never truly defined. It's come at from the perspective of, like you said, the C-suite and above, which their outlook on the world is just inherently going to be very different than the people supporting them with the daily work. And so defining how they are using the language and really getting everyone on board with understanding why they've chosen those specific values and why those are the ones that are the most important to them as an organization, and how they personally plan on exhibiting those values and living those values for the organization. The trust, like you said, I think that is the core of the whole thing.
Yeah. And we could go on and on. There's lots of different types of values that I think are really important. Trust and transparency being a couple I believe strongly in. I know another one, and you just alluded to it briefly in talking about that generational dynamic, but we live in a complex world. We need diverse and inclusive workplaces. And so nowadays, a lot of companies have recognized, at least if nothing else from a PR standpoint, diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. They need to talk about it. We got Black Lives Matter. We have all this social strife. Like, they need to at least do something. And so I do see that being an impetus, for at least some of that kind of value around diversity. Hopefully we can go deeper than that though. But that's another one that I know you feel strongly about. So let's talk a little bit about the diversity element, and how that plays into a healthy organization and why, people should consider having that as a core value, beyond, again, just giving lip service to it.
Oh, yeah. The lip service is, we've all seen it happen, right? We've absolutely seen big corporations say, oh, this is now a quote unquote thing. Let's hire a DEI specialist, director, and let's get some diverse hires in the door. That's such a mistake, because just hiring quote unquote diverse workforce does nothing for your actual diversity. And the inclusion part is interesting, because if you're trying to take these, now you've made a few quote unquote diversity hires and you're trying to include them in a system that was not set up for them to succeed in, the outcome is not going to be great for really anybody. The only way for the diversity to truly be real, to truly take effect, is to question the system itself. And is it going to be uncomfortable? Absolutely. Are you going to have to allow people to ask questions and of people that aren't maybe used to being questioned? Absolutely. But the systems themselves have to be re-examined, because the expectation to include diverse people in a system that, again, wasn't set up for their success and lots of times set up for their oppression is not going to help your company. It's not going to help your workforce. It's going to create, beyond feelings of animosity, just genuine disgruntlement and upset. And, so bringing in these hires is going to turn out poorly for you, instead of actually working on a new way of working and using them and their talents and their strengths, not to teach you how to not be racist, because that's giving them 2 jobs and you're probably underpaying them for one of those jobs, but to actually create a new system where they can thrive. Because if they're thriving, I guarantee you, your leadership will thrive. If your leadership is thriving, your organization will thrive. But you have to allow for some uncomfortableness in the meantime.
I love that. And the uncomfortableness part of it, and just being open to the ambiguity of moving into that dark space, that darkness, and not understanding exactly how to move forward, recognizing you need to, though. I applaud organizations who start to move into the diversity space, and they may not really know what they're doing. They may not know how to do it effectively, but at least they're willing to take that step. And then they start to critically self-reflect on the systems, like you mentioned, and recognize really these inequities that are in place that systemically are going to harm individuals and harm the organization as a whole. Hopefully we can move into inclusion and belonging and really psychological safety and just having a healthy organization. That's what we're shooting for, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is baby steps, and sometimes it is, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we do need to be committed to that kind of a core value beyond the lip service, beyond the PR, beyond, whatever, statement we make to appease, quote unquote, appease the employees or whatever. We need to move beyond that. So I agree with that. I think that's super, super important. Another area that I know you talk about is around employee agency. I'm curious what you mean exactly by that, how it connects in your mind to the employee experience and the broader tent of, what we're talking about in terms of values-based leadership.
Absolutely. What I mean with employee agency is, if you're doing your hiring correctly, you are hiring for expertise, for potential, for that actual individual to lean into them being the most who they are. Not, someone you're like, okay, well, they're rough, we can quote unquote fix their problems and then they'll be a perfect peg for our organization. I'm very anti that. I'm very pro hiring for the individual, knowing that those rough edges are going to be what you can grab onto and what's going to make them successful. However, a lot of times these people are brought in, they're told like, hey, we're bringing you in to make some change. We're bringing you in to sort of look at things with a new POV. We're bringing you in to do what you do best. But then they are given no actual agency from the stakeholders to make any decisions, to do what they do best, to change processes. So it then does become lip service. And then you've got an employee who is brought in to do all these great things, or even not just great things, but good things that they are good at. And then they're stifled. They are not allowed to do that. They are allowed to discuss it at meetings, but then nothing ever actually changes because they don't have the power or agency to make any change. And it all comes from the stakeholders and the C-suite's comfort seats, because they, it's going to take them work to change things. It's going to take them a little bit more uncomfortableness. It's going to take them a little bit of change. And while they think they want that and they say that they want innovation, it's really easy to be like, yeah, but I can just do how things have always been done. I'm fine. And
yeah, I want innovation, but I don't want anything to change. Go figure, right?
Right. Exactly. And so if you actually give your workforce, knowing that you've hired the right people, give them the agency to make that change, will you be knocked off your little comfort seat a little bit? Maybe, but good stuff's going to come out of it. New ideas, creativity. You'll become a leader in an organization that's the organization itself is leading, which I can't think of anything better than that. So I think people really misstep when they hire properly and then don't use that employee properly.
And it's hard enough to hire properly, right? So
Mhm,
you put all the effort into getting the right person with the right expertise, capabilities, competencies,
mhm,
to help the organization be successful. You bring this person in with expertise
mhm.
and all the insight, everything that, all the intangibles that they bring with them to the position, and then you constrain them in all of these ways where you don't allow them
Mhm,
to actually do what you hired them to
mhm.
do. That's exactly to your point. And often it is because they end up pushing up against organizational structures, and policies, and just
Mhm.
tradition. And instead of taking a step back and looking at all of that and saying, wait, is any of that actually necessary, or is that hindering our progress? So often we default to, let's just keep things the same way. We restrict and constrain these people, and then we are surprised when they leave and they go
Yeah,
somewhere
and it
else.
comes down to ego of the stakeholders, of the people who do have agency, right? It comes down to they don't want to be questioned. Hey, why are we doing it this way? When it's a perfectly valid question that should always be asked. And it's unfortunate that it took you bringing someone in new to ask that question. Your leadership should always be asking, why are we doing this way? And yeah, a lot of it will come down to ego and absolutely, I love that word that you use, stifling, absolutely stifling your staff and not letting them lean into the things that they do best. And because your ego's in the way.
Yeah, and it's one of the saddest things that I see, because you see this new person with the potential to really drive a lot of change, and then there's only so long that they're willing to beat their head up against the wall
Mhm. And they
before
will leave.
before they'll leave. And then it's to the organization's detriment, it's to the
Mhm.
individual's detriment. It's better for everybody if we can
Yeah.
just embrace it. So I love that idea of employee agency. Another way that we often talk about it is in terms of decision making autonomy,
Mhm.
and the ability to just connect with your work and lead out with your expertise. That's just so vital. So I think that's another really great value that we can espouse within an organization. And coming back to where we started, values based leadership, we have to, as leaders, we have to live up to these values that we state, that we share with everyone else, and talk about in terms of importance and meaning. Not only do we have to live up to the same level we expect of everyone else, we have to go above that. Because people are looking to us. And unfortunately, a lot of times, it's the opposite. A lot of times leaders and executives, they feel like they have their own set of rules, and so they don't do what they want everyone else to do. And in fact, they need to do more. They need to live those values even better. And it has to be very transparent in their behaviors with their people. Otherwise, there's really no chance of these values taking hold in any meaningful way within the organization. Well, Evie, it's been a really great conversation. The time has flown by, but we're coming close to the end of our time together. I would love to continue the conversation, so perhaps I could have you back another time. But before we close today, I wanted to give you a chance to give the last word on the topic, and to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your consulting work and coaching work, and anything else you would like to share as we close.
Absolutely. Since I am now mainly working on the client side, I would say if you are looking to make a change in your career and you are interviewing companies to make sure that your values truly line up with theirs, and talk to current employees to make sure they are living those values and that they are allowing you to do what you do best. And on the organization side, hire better. Hire the way that you actually know you should be, not the, do what I say, not what I do. Actually do the proper hiring. and do it well. It's like you said, it's better for everyone. If you're looking for either some staffing help or you yourself are making a career change, you can absolutely find me at ebsanders.com. I have quite a few free resources there, so please do come and make yourself available to them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what EB can do for you and your organization. And for everyone listening today, as always, I hope you can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a